Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this conference, which I hope is going to be stimulating and provocative and engaging for everyone. My name is Moira Sinclair. As Jonathan said, I'm the Chief Executive of the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, and I'm also Chair of Clore Leadership, a job I'm very proud to do, and perhaps we'll talk a little bit more about that with our guest, Darren, in a minute. I'm delighted to be in conversation with him. He's the Chief Executive of Arts Council England. And of course, we are the opening segment for Governance Now conference. So hopefully we're going to set the tone for you. I'm a white woman in my 50s with curly hair that's morphing from dyed brown to liberating silver and dark grey. That's what I claim anyway. I'm wearing glasses and I'm beaming in today from the small spare bedroom of my home in Hertfordshire. Good morning, Darren. It's great to see you. There's a lot in Let's Create and in the delivery plan, which is Arts Council England's kind of map for us all over the next period of time, about wanting organisations to model best practice and for the sector to achieve a universal standard in many aspects of our operations. So I suppose my first question to you, and I'm hoping this can be a bit of a discussion, is how are you expecting governance models to shift to help achieve that? What change would you really like to see in the way that we govern our arts and cultural organisations in the UK?
Good morning, Moira, and good morning to everyone else. I hope that you're all well. I should just start by saying that I'm a white man in my late 40s and I have slightly less hair than when lockdown began and slightly more pounds on my midriff than when lockdown began. I'm beaming into you from my home office here in Kent. So I hope everyone's well, and I hope everyone's taking good care of themselves and looking after themselves in what's been a very challenging year or so for everybody. To answer your first question, Moira, I think one of the things I would say is there are a real range of different models that we work with across this sector. So there are charities, there are companies that are limited by guarantee, there are organisations that are part of local authorities, some organisations are part of universities or higher education institutions. But there's something that sort of links all of them together, which is that the best performing ones of those have really strong leadership and really good governance. And for me, that's absolutely central. When things go wrong in organisations and you look at it afterwards, it's often because actually there was a problem with the governance at the start. And so for me, the role that people do at sitting on boards, whether they be chairs or members of boards, is really, really important. And I think those boards have the ability to inspire change, to work to ensure that there's a happy and inclusive workforce in their organisations. And also the thing that I think is really important for boards is that there is that wide range of ideas and experiences that everybody brings to the table. And I suppose that the thing that we're very interested in doing is to ensure that people on boards are really thinking very hard about the mission of their organisation, about the values that their organisation has, about making sure there's good structural things in place. Some of it is about actually systems and processes. So having good business planning, having strong and interesting and novel and challenging ways of working that mean that we're always getting the best outcome, and thinking about other things as well that we're really interested in right now around building up data, around having research and development as part of your organization, about thinking about the future. So a huge amount of things that you might want to unpack, but I think for me the headline is that boards are really, really vital part of our arts and culture infrastructure and ecology in this country.
It's a lot, isn't it, that you're asking of boards, and in the main, I know you've got all of those different models, but in the main they're volunteers, and I think we forget that at our peril. I'm not expecting you to name names because I think that would be inappropriate, but could you give the people listening some specific examples of what good and bad practice looks like? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it would be wrong for me to name names, but I think to echo what you just said, Moira, you're absolutely right. We rely heavily on the people who sit on our boards, but many of them do it on a voluntary basis. And I think one of the things we have a responsibility to people on boards to do is to make sure that we offer them examples of best practice and the ability to gain advice and training and learning. And so events like this actually are really, really important. Some of the work that Clore has been doing is also really, really important in actually delivering training to people and showing people what best practice and good models look like. I think one of the things that's interesting is where we see boards that are working well, there's an acknowledgement that life doesn't stand still. And crikey, over the last year and a half, boards have been faced with all sorts of things that they really weren't expecting to plan for. In our sector, nobody expected, potential shutdown for more than 12 months of organisations, revenue streams turning off literally overnight, real challenges about looking after workforce and what we do with, to ensure that they were both looked after and still employed. And I think, that idea of some of it's about intent and is about aiming to be a beacon of good practice and aiming to be an organisation that continually self-reflects and learns. And so I suppose round the boardroom table on those really strong organisations, it's about who's actually involved, where power is held within an organisation, how the functional ways of meetings actually work, how board members are recruited, and also then for boards to really set quite ambitious targets for their organisations, and then to continually monitoring them, and also making sure that there are good policies in place around areas that are really, really important, like harassment or discrimination. Those sorts of policies need to be in place, and boards need to be able to work with their executive leadership to hold the organisation to account. And I do think it's a partnership, so it's not an adversarial thing. It's a partnership between the non-executive board and the strong executive leadership in an organisation.
That balance is really important, isn't it? The sort of that sense of you absolutely don't want adversarial, and I would agree with you that that's a perfect example of kind of when the world has gone wrong. And ideally, I think you want strong leadership on both sides of the equation. But you don't want a weak board and a strong executive, because I think that causes problems. But equally, you don't want a board that's over dominant and then an executive who feel they can't actually do the job that they're paid to do. I think you learn that a bit on the job as you go as well. It's not something that comes naturally when you first step into a board position.
I think you're absolutely right, and you personally have been both, or are both, a chair and a chief executive currently. So, yeah. So you see that, and it is different because we do require many people who become chairs have had chief executive lives beforehand, and it is a very different role. And actually, that relationship between the chair and the chief executive, I think, is absolutely key. And when it works, it's really magic. And I think there's another layer actually in arts organisations as well, because particularly in the cultural sector, where we're in the performing arts sector, or in the museum sector, where we're putting on shows or events of some sort, there's a creative element as well. So there's often a creative director or an artistic director who's also at the table, and sometimes an executive director and an artistic director, and that sort of triumvirate is really, really important as well, and the relationship there. And I think I see with board chairs stepping in and really being the on a seesaw. They're the bit in the pivot in the middle, actually just making sure that everything stays the same, because we do need to have organisations that have strong revenue streams, but we also want to have organisations that are artistically creative and innovative, and often the board and the chair building that relationship there can be absolutely crucial. So I think it's going to be complex, and it's never going to be one size fits all, but it does require people to all the time be thinking about how they can be quite lithe and limber in the way they work. There's a lot of movement there. It's never going to be solid, and it's never going to stay the same.
It's fascinating. Nick Owen has just posted in the chat that Yorkshire Cricket Club is a sobering example, to say the least, at the moment, of the relationship between the board and the executive. I think we're all watching that and learning a huge amount. I think one often learns from the more difficult cases rather than the brilliant cases. And you mentioned, Darren, a little while ago that you want to see a shift in power at the board level. And I think that's partly speaking to the Arts Council's focus on relevance, but it's also speaking to actually the Yorkshire Cricket Club idea, which is how do you make sure you've got the right voices around the table, so that when we hold our organisations to account, we're doing it through the right lens as well. So in terms of, and I think that means in terms of representation of younger people, artists on boards, people with disabilities on boards, more racial diversity, for example. I'm speaking as a funder on this occasion. So what do we as funders need to do differently? How do we shift our expectations, and how do we help that power shift? Because it does mean we're looking for different skills and attributes on our boards than perhaps we did 5 to 10 years ago.
I think you're absolutely right. I think and recruitment is really, really important, and having recruitment that reaches beyond, if you like, the usual suspects, and an excuse of I haven't met anybody or I don't know anybody with those particular characteristics is not a good enough excuse. Everybody can go and find somebody with all of the characteristics that we would wish to see around the board table. And I think the important thing then is it's not just about getting people into the room and sitting at the table. It's about creating an environment where everybody around that table is able to contribute with equity, and I think that's really, really important. I think many of us who've been on boards over the years will have sat there and seen one or two individuals around the table who don't contribute and don't feel able to contribute, maybe for whatever reason. And we need to make sure that one of the effective things about good chairing there is to bring those people out, because they were appointed at the start because they had something to contribute. And I think that's the important thing. We need to make sure that everybody feels that their voice can be heard and has equal importance and equal weight to everybody around that table. And I think for us as the Arts Council, for you, I know as another key funder as well, and also for Clore, we are working to create and share tools that enable that to happen. We want to be able to identify best practice to, this is not about telling boards that they're getting everything wrong. It's about saying how you could be more right and what more you could do. So for me, it's a journey for boards. We want to share those tools and we want to provide support and training. I mean, just to give you an example, we've got in our North area next week, we've got 3 sessions being run on disability and governance in partnership with Business Disability. So, there's a lot of those things that are happening. And I think we're always very keen to signpost to people those opportunities. But also from the Arts Council's point of view as an organisation, we're here to listen and learn. And when we have people who are leading boards or are experienced sitting on boards, we're really interested to hear from them about what they feel we could do more to help them and to help people like them.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a conversation we're having both on both boards that I'm sitting on, but also as a chief exec, which is it's partly about cultural norms, isn't it, as well, and how we challenge ourselves to think differently about the way we present material at boards, what's actually necessary to come to board, and how that's absorbed when boards meet, what time of day they meet. I mean, a whole series of things which either create that welcome that you're talking about and allow people to be able to bring all of their richness into play or not. There's a couple of chats going on. So Rebecca Manson-Jones says she's really glad to hear us referencing artists as necessary presence on boards and reporting to the board. And Steve Mortimer is saying perhaps we should be looking to circular models that are much more inclusive and diverse rather than top down. And Rebecca's then in a little conversation and saying that that's a model they're looking at for spare tire. That's Rebecca speaking, and Steve saying it's the future, this sort of more circular model. Certainly within my own organisation, we're getting challenged from particularly younger staff members to say, the hierarchies that we've had in the past no longer feel current, and actually are there different ways of us making sure that voices are feeding in. And I think people are trying things like advisory boards and youth boards and shadow boards, all sorts of different models as well for getting that richness, as you described it, into the governing process.
I think you're absolutely right. I think, for us at the Arts Council, we've now got our first youth advisory board, which we've not had before, and actually making sure that that is fully inclusive, and what are the requirements of those individuals who are in their teens that might need extra support that they wouldn't need necessarily in their 30s or 40s, so just trying to understand that and seeing it from their point of view, because they've got an awful lot to contribute, a real richness of a perspective that isn't there, although I know all of us were once teens, but that was for a lot of us quite a long time ago now. So and being a teenager today is very, very different from being a teenager in our day. So I think we've got to recognize that. But also, I think we need to think about how as you say, things like the circular model are really, really important. How we actually bring people throughout an organisation to be able to have a relationship that's both formal and informal with their boards. And I think also the other thing we have to always remember is the boards do have statutory and financial responsibilities as well. We need those to be carried out, but we need them to be carried out properly, but not to the exclusion of all of the other things that we've been talking about. And that's an interesting thing, that a journey I think we've got to go on. You know, we're custodians of public money, you're custodian of charitable money, and we have to make sure we follow the law of the land and the regulations there. But at the same time, we're working with creative organisations, and we want to be innovative, and we want to have new ideas. We want to have the artists and the creators' voices at the table. And we also want those people who we come into the organisation. One of the things I do observe sometimes is that we have people who've got long business pedigrees, and they come into an organisation, they meet artists, and they actually sometimes forget their business pedigree, and so we still need them to be there and to be legally and financially compliant as well. So it is there will always be tensions, and there will always be things that we want to press on, but actually if we have a shared set of goals, a shared set of values, a way of respecting other human beings around the table, a real sense of mission in an organisation, I think all of that can be overcome.
I think that sort of legal and financial regulation should be the kind of underpinning, shouldn't it? What everyone needs to understand, you get those right, and then what you've got is the fantastic platform for doing the things that we all care and love about. And getting that diversity of thought around the table feels really important to me. That particularly in the last year, when we've had all of those challenges that you described being thrown at us, if we'd only had one lens and one set of skills around the table, I think we would have really struggled in many instances. It's been I have to say, it's been a real challenge chairing in the middle of this, as you've said, and the amount of time that it's taken. And I have two fantastic organisations with wonderful executive teams, but we as boards have had to step into space that we perhaps wouldn't usually expect to do. And I think one of the skills I've needed to draw on in many aspects is that sort of comfort with ambiguity and uncertainty, actually, alongside the regulatory framework. The not knowing has been very challenging. Are there other skills and attributes that you think add value to cultural boards, especially in the coming months? Are there things you think we might really need to amp up or accelerate in a way that we perhaps haven't done before?
I think the first thing I'd say is I absolutely recognise how difficult it's been for people who've been on boards, and also for the executives, senior executives in organisations, as it has been for everybody in every organisation. There's been some really difficult decisions that people have had to take, and that sense of uncertainty and ambiguity in the world, that sense that basically, however good our business planning or disaster recovery was, there's a great big pandemic out there, and it's beyond us and it's beyond our control, and that can be quite scary for everybody, and acknowledging that. I think also I do sort of feel that there can sometimes be a loneliness for chief executives or chairs on boards, because they're making big decisions. So having networks, I think, is really important, and being able to talk to other people in similar situations is really important. I mean, we've talked about the sort of regulatory and that sort of finance and legal structure. So parking that to one side, for me, all of our organisations in the end are about relationships and about people in one way or another. We are creating work for people. And our organisations are peopled by people, and so I think it's really, really important for me at the Arts Council. What gets me up in the morning is that I believe that in the end, my three words are: we create happier lives. Creating happier lives is what we're about, and I think that's true for a lot of the organisations we work with. We improve people's lives, and we've got to hold on to that. And so holding on to that sense of purpose through all of these troubled times is really, really important. I think agility and ambiguity and being comfortable with change are really, really important, and that's come to the fore over the last 18 months or so. But all of that, for me, pales into insignificance so long as we look after our people who work with us, and that's really important. So boards and senior executives have a real responsibility to look after their teams, and I think many organisations have done that extraordinarily well, recognising that each person is an individual around the table, but also actually the end goal for our organizations is about creating great things out there around the country in towns and cities and villages that change people's lives for the better. And I think we've always got to hold on to that. That's why we do this.
Gosh, that's exactly right, isn't it? There are a couple of things I'd add to that before we close, and we're just about to come to a close. So I'll come back to you, Darren, for last words. But just a shout out, I think, to Clore. You'd expect me to do that, but I am chair of Clore leadership. But actually, those networks have been incredibly important during the last 18 months to 2 years. I was a Clore fellow back in 2004. I was on the phone or on Zoom to my Clore fellows within 3 weeks of the pandemic breaking, and we met constantly through that period of time. Having people who know you and connect to you is really important. I'd also put a call out or a shout out for the Association of Chairs, who I think are beginning to do some really interesting work in thinking about what chairs need in that lonely space. And I do think it's lonely at times, Darren. And the other thing I'd say is something about communication. And I think all of us have learned that through processes of culture change, communication, you need to do far more than you think you need to do, and it needs to be fairly regular too. So I think the sense of making sure that skill is being brought into the boardroom as well, so that the board are constantly in communication with the organisation is important. There's a couple of comments here. Adam says there was a fantastic initiative, Adam Bradley, by the ARC to bring 2 artists into each board meeting to give new perspectives to the board and demystify the governance process for artists. I think there are lots of people who are now beginning to do that. I'm now looking at a whole stream of stuff about dance. So Rachel Deadman says, this reminds me of teaching dance in a school and how much better it is when the teachers join in, and how when they sit on the side, the work can be that little bit harder. I'm very excited to look at this challenge as an exclusive and enticing dance where joining in is much more fun than sitting on the sidelines, which I think is a wonderful thing. And then there's a whole series of comments about needing to keep hydrated and looking at the dance as well as being in the middle of the dance. Darren, is there anything you want to leave people with as a final thought as they go into this day of thinking and reflection and learning and inspiration about governance?
Well, I suppose I just carry on with the dance analogy, actually, to be honest with you. I think that good boards and strong executive teams are always working together in a well choreographed dance. So I would encourage people to think about that. I would encourage people to be absolutely open to change, to do everything they can to build their boards up, and to all of the areas we've talked about, and making sure that they're representative and diverse, but also that they're supportive of their executive teams as well. And I think, the final thing I'd say is just thank you to everybody who's on this meeting, in the conference today, who are volunteers, who are sitting on boards. You make a massive difference. The arts and cultural infrastructure in this country wouldn't operate in the way it does without you, and we're all very grateful. We probably don't say thank you enough, and so I'm saying thank you now.
Yeah, I would agree with that last comment in particular. I do take the chance when we have the trustees kind of day to say thank you to the trustees that I work with, both as an executive and as a chair. I think that this country is richer because of the contribution that everyone makes to arts and culture, and the boards are increasingly a vital part of that. I see very few examples now of people who are sitting on the sidelines and not participating in some shape or form in the dance. Even those of us who, in my instance, chair a dance company, I wouldn't dream of actually getting onto the dance floor with my participants, because it's too much for anybody to bear. Darren, thank you so much for coming and just giving us a kickstart for the morning and insight into both your thinking and also Arts Council England's thinking. I think it's extremely heartening that we are that you are placing an emphasis on this, that you're saying that governance matters. I think it's been an area where there's been a little bit of talk, but not perhaps as much as there should be. And having seen what's happened over the past 1.5 years, 2 years, I think we can all agree that we need to keep working at this, and any opportunity to come together and talk about how we do that in a supportive fashion is really positive.